Rarity is an important component in all of Pokémon. The relative scarcity of some Pokémon is precisely what makes them valuable, and in a lot of cases, rarity is associated with being stronger, having a higher base stat total, though not always, as we know. I think that this is good. It means that the work for locating and catching a rare Pokémon is often rewarded with strength, and makes it more fun to chase those Pokémon. If Rattata was super rare and Dragonite was super common, I doubt it would feel nearly as fun to blast Hyper Beam at other Pokemon with Dragonite, and catching a Rattata would be a supremely disappointing experience. But the way that the games have implemented this rarity leaves something to be desired in my view. Owing to the fact that the games in the beginning were relatively crude RPGs, most rarity is implemented in two ways. Encounter chance in a given area and the number of areas within which a certain Pokemon can be found, including when that number is 0 and it is a version exclusive. It is the first of these that I have a problem with. The actual experience of trying to catch a low encounter chance Pokemon is extremely frustrating, especially for people who have grown up playing the games and continue to play them as adults. In earlier generations, certain Pokemon had very low encounter chances in specific areas, as low as 1% in some places. Many people will remember Pokemon like Tauros being a 1% encounter chance in the Safari Zone, which, combined with Safari Zone battle mechanics, made it one of the most elusive Pokemon in those games. Granted, the reward was pretty great for catching it, since few Pokemon are more threatening in Generation 1 than a Tauros. I think that the Safari Zone is something of a special case, since by design, the Pokemon there cannot be encountered in many other areas, if any, and if they could be, there would be extremely little point to having a Safari Zone. But in other contexts, where the encounter tables just happen to include a 1% encounter chance for certain Pokemon, it is much less gratifying. In most cases, there is no way to increase your odds of getting such an encounter, which makes catching that Pokemon a tiresome endeavour of generating encounters until you happen to roll the dice in a favourable way. I do not think that this is fun or rewarding. On the contrary, it is a tedium that makes a joke of trying to complete a Pokédex, which rightly requires some luck, but should not to this extent. Part of the reason that I started thinking about this is that I am completing the Pokédex in Pokémon Emerald at the moment, and found myself needing to catch a wild Volbeat. It can be found in the wild in Emerald, which is great. However, it is a 1% encounter chance on Route 117, the daycare route. Fine, whatever I said. 1% really isn't that bad. It shouldn't take me too long to find it. It took over 45 minutes. Is 45 minutes a long time? No, by most definitions it is not. Is it a long time to spend using Sweet Scent on repeat until you happen to roll a 1 in 100 chance? Yes. Is it a long time when you consider that you spent all that time looking for a Volbeat of all Pokemon? It is an eternity in that case. In some cases in Emerald, low encounter chances exist in place of version exclusives from Ruby and Sapphire. Yes, you can catch both Plusle and Minun in Emerald, but one is a 15% encounter chance, rare but certainly doable, and the other is a 2% encounter chance, which is a bore. I guess I like it more than them being unobtainable altogether, since I've really never enjoyed version exclusive Pokemon anyway, but more on that in a moment. I will say one small thing in favour of regular 1% encounter chances. When you start looking for one and find it within your first few encounters, it activates a primal part of the brain and releases a sweet hit of dopamine paralleled by few other things. It just feels really good in that specific instance. Would I still prefer a more skill-based or balanced mechanic to implement the rarity of Pokemon? Absolutely. Do I enjoy a little monkey brain thrill nonetheless? Definitely. I am a little less critical of the implementation in the earlier games, since they were made under significantly harsher hardware limitations, with less room to expand or move. But by Generation 3, they had figured out that they could lock some Pokemon behind areas and activate them at a game store if the player brought their cartridge in. If they can do that, they could have easily made Pokemon accessible only in quest-unlocked areas, or made them dependent on different mechanics rather than the rudimentary encounter chance. I will also lastly note that the other blunt tool for making Pokemon scarce is to make them a version exclusive, forcing players to trade in order to obtain them. I don't want to speak for a large group of people, but does anyone like this? I just find it such a cynical way to sell two different sets of games without making the games materially better. The incentives to trade are still there, with boosted EXP for traded Pokemon and things like the Masuda method for finding shinies, so why arbitrarily lock Pokemon in another version of the game? Surely they knew that some lonely kids wouldn't have anyone to trade with, so making them miss out on parts of the games just seems unnecessary. I am really eager to hear people's thoughts on this, since it just seems like a pure negative to me. Now, personally, when I criticize the thing, Pokemon in particular, I like to propose an alternative that would work better in my view. In this case, I do think there are a few ways that rarity could still be a core feature of catching and collecting Pokemon, while being more interesting or skillful than simply having really low encounter chances. The first is simply to raise the encounter chances in some areas to a higher percentage in each area. A 1% encounter chance becomes 2%, and a 2 a 5, for example. This is about as crude as the existing system, but it would maintain a lot of rarity while making each grind a little bit less frustrating on average. This is far from a total solution to the problems I have described, but it would be a small improvement among others. The main change I would propose is that Pokemon are scarce by where they are found, not by their encounter rates. By this, I mean that rare Pokemon should be found in only very few areas on the map. This could be caves, grottos, mountaintops, castles, graveyards, the deep seas, what have you, whatever seems relevant for those Pokemon. This is something that already exists to some extent, but I would like to see it go further than it already has. Rare Pokemon should appear in exceedingly few areas, and be no rarer than perhaps 10% encounter chance in those places. What would be cooler is those areas being unlockable by completing tasks in-game. This is not a novel or foreign concept, but seemingly Pokemon only seems to want to use it to gatekeep access to legendary Pokemon, rather than other rare Pokemon. There's no reason that portions of the map can't be locked off until specific tasks are completed, with those areas containing unique Pokemon for those games. I would also advocate for more niche and specific forms of rarity, many of which were pioneered in Generation 3. Shedinja and Feebas are both very rare, and certainly obtainable in every game, but with certain preconditions that make getting them feel like a reward. Gimmicky, yes, in Feebas's case, quite tedious, but in my opinion preferable to mindless grinding in a patch of grass for the better part of an hour. I think the series has somewhat moved on from the crude encounter chance mode of scarcity since Generation 8, as the encounter system in the overworld is not really the same as walking through grass patches or other encounter tiles. Yes, rare Pokemon still have probabilities assigned to whether they will appear in front of the player or not, but the experience of looking for them is a lot more interesting, since the areas are large and more varied than just walking around for a few tiles. The 3D overworld blunts the tediousness of grinding in my opinion. With that said, I think my critiques and proposed solutions are still useful for people working on older style ROM hacks and fan projects, if they are looking for something to differentiate themselves from the main series. I wouldn't mind the scarcity as much if the player had some way to alter it in their favour a bit more. This could be through the use of field moves or items, or the limited range of abilities that have effects outside of battle, but it would make catching these rare Pokemon a lot more enjoyable in my view. Think of it the same as how no one would hatch eggs without using a Pokemon with magma armor in their party. I will also acknowledge that for a subset of Pokemon fans, the thing I've spent all this time critiquing is a blessing, not a curse. The 1% encounter is a very cool and fun thing for them, and they enjoy spending their time grinding for that golden encounter. For these people, my words fall on deaf ears, and that's okay, as video games are big enough to cater to everyone. Should I want to play a game where there are no 1% encounters, I can. and if they want to catch Tauros in the Safari Zone in Generation 1 without desum manipulation, they can do that. To each their own. To distill it down, my problem with Pokemon's rarity system is that it distorts the relationship between effort and reward. Maybe others prefer the raw and random approach taken by the early games, but I personally like my games to reward the player for putting in some effort. Having certain Pokemon appear at a 1% chance just does not feel rewarding to me. Rarity can be a component of it, but a 1% chance where the chances are generated by simply walking backwards and forwards in a patch of grass is just super boring to me. This is why I could never be a shiny hunter in Generations 2 and 3. Rolling the dice over and over until you simply get lucky is not something that I want to do. On the other hand, I really enjoy shiny hunting with the Dex Nav and the Pokeradar, because while chance is not eliminated, far from it, at least how well I am doing it factors into the odds in some way or other. It is also possible that I'm just old and this kind of thing is really fun for kids. Who knows? Maybe the rarity and arbitrariness of Dragonite and Volbeat being a 1% encounter chance is really fun for them, and I'm simply raining on their parade. But I know that as I get older and my time gets more and more precious to me, I have way less patience for spending half my day running backwards and forwards, hoping that the little computer in my hands will spare me the misery. That's all I had, folks. Tell me, do you enjoy grinding for low encounter chance Pokemon? Did you have a good time catching Tauros in Generation 1? Leave a comment below telling me how wrong I am. I'd love to hear people's thoughts. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe, it helps the channel out a bunch. Give me a follow on Twitch if you want to chat between videos and see some speedruns. Thanks for watching.